about what our plans are here this morning. Anyone have any questions about that? In a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Moore to run through the documents for review. Adam Nowalski.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to recognize Mr. Reed this morning. Not only is he our liaison, but also the recently elected chairman of the New England Council now. So great to have you still with us. Eric was concerned, certainly happy that you were elected chairman, was concerned that might remove you in your position, but great to still have you with us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Adam. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I was planning to do that when we have the full council convene, but no, I think I appreciate that, and I'll make sure to make that point as well when we have the full council convene at 1 o'clock. So, and congratulations, Eric. Glad you're still with us. All right. With that said, and seeing no other questions or comments at this time, Chris, are you prepared to start stepping us through 2021 actions and deliverables at this time?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. All right. I'm going to turn it over to you. The way we've done this in the past is Chris will go through species by species and then functional committee by functional committee. And I think it would be best to stop at the end of each section to see if there are any questions or comments for 2021. I think we'll probably get into more discussion about the actions and deliverables for 2022. But Chris, if you want to stop at the end of each section, I'll go ahead and look and see if there are any members of the executive committee that want to offer any thoughts or comments at that time. And then I think for 2021, I'll wait until we finish to see if the public has anything they want to offer. But in 2022, I might ask the public each time, after each section, if they want to offer any thoughts. So we'll try to be as efficient as we can. We have until noon today. And so with that, Chris, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to run us through the documentation. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. There are several documents behind tab 1 of the briefing book. They include a review of where we're at in 2021 and what we plan for the rest of the year. So that's the 2021 proposed actions and deliverables. And also, and most importantly, the 2022 proposed actions and deliverables. I think most of the folks who are on the call today, at least from a council perspective, have been involved in this process before. It relates to our strategic plan and our implementation plan development and implementation. So each year we go through a process that starts with a staff review of what's happened in the current year, a production of documents for consideration by the executive committee in October, a review of those documents by the executive committee, and then hopefully a recommendation from the executive committee to the full council for their consideration at the December council meeting. There are a long list of things in this document. I'll go through each section, as Mike indicated, basically stopping, asking for questions. Mary's going to help me by scrolling through the documents as I relate to them or discuss them. So let's get started with 2021 action deliverables. So this is a document that we actually started using a couple of years ago, which I think serves us well in terms of updating the council as to progress and what we plan to complete for 2021. And this is a way of comparing what we said we were going to do with what we actually will get done. The other thing to note as we go through the document is that there are a couple of things that were added during the year. That's typical for the council, although we typically don't add too much. We do very well in terms of planning for the year, but there are occasions where we have to add things. So I'll stop and indicate those to you as we go through it. So the first thing to note is that there's definitions: completed, in progress, ongoing, delayed, or postponed. I think those are pretty obvious as to what they might mean. The other thing to note is that we're not done with 2021 yet. So we're in October. We have another council meeting in December, and we expect action at that particular council meeting to complete some of the items in the list. So taking a look at summer flounder, scup, black sea bass first, of course, we've had specs. Those are done. We expect to take action on recreational management measures in December. Those will be completed. We've had ongoing discussions about commercial minimum mesh size regulations for those 3 species for a number of years, many years, probably decades, and actually started a process where we looked at some analyses to compare commercial mesh regulations for those 3 species to see if we could find some commonality. That isn't complete yet, and we expect that we will be taking action on that in 2022, and probably involving a contractor to help us with that. We could talk about that when we get to 2022. Like every year, we have the advisory panel fishery performance reports. We did those. One of the things that we started and didn't complete is development of a framework action and guidance documents to address the prioritized recreational reform initiative topics. That's morphed into a consideration of a recreational harvest control rule. I think everyone knows that that's in progress. We expect to discuss that at our October 21 meeting with the MAFMC board. One of the things that was delayed as a result of the council decision was to delay the amendment to consider recreational sector separation. We expect to pick that up in 2022 as well. One of the things that we also had to do is postpone our evaluation of scup discards in beer restricted areas, largely because of the lack of data. Commercial discards were not available for 2020 due to the 6-month suspension of the observer program related to COVID. We expect to take action in December on the summer flounder scup black sea bass allocation amendment, so that'll be completed. Brandon continues to work to develop EAFM management strategy evaluation for summer flounder at the MFC. We have, by the end of the year, we have fully supported the management track assessments for summer flounder scup and black sea bass, that into the specs. Here's a couple of additions. One of the things that we got involved with this year was the MSC certification for scup. It's on the list because it does require a lot of time from staff, and we were directly involved with that particular activity. We also considered a remand of the Black Sea Bass Commercial Allocation Amendment that we didn't anticipate at the beginning of 2021. That's completed. We hope to have those documents submitted to GARFO by the end of the year. Finally, we did also support a 2022 research track assessment for Black Sea Bass. So a lot there, obviously a lot going on in the demersal world, the summer flounder scup black sea bass world. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll stop and see if there's any questions. And remember, this is for 2021.
All right, thanks, Chris.
Yep.
Let me see if anybody does anyone have any questions for Chris or comments? Okay, seeing nothing, Chris. Let's go ahead and move on to bluefish.
Sounds good. So bluefish, we developed the 2022-2023 bluefish specs. We expect to take action on, or we have taken action on 2022 bluefish recreational management measures. We have developed an advisory panel fishery performance reports. We have completed and submitted the bluefish allocation and rebuilding amendment. The next item is interesting. Will generate some discussion when we get to 2022. At the beginning of 2021 or late 2020, we thought it was a good idea to initiate action to implement a possession limit for frigate and bullet mackerel in the mid-Atlantic. That's delayed. That box to the right says no progress expected in 2021 due to other priorities. That's true. Also, the note indicates why it's in the bluefish FMP, because of the high co-occurrence of bullet frigate mackerel in bluefish catch. So delayed means that potentially this is an activity that we'll contemplate for 2022. And again, when we get to 2022, we'll have a good discussion about that. One of the other things we did for bluefish is support the management track assessment. We also supported the 2022 research track assessment. That's it for bluefish. Any questions about bluefish?
Any questions for Chris? Michelle Duvall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Chris. Just a quick question on bullet and frigate. I know we sent a letter to NIMS headquarters with respect to, I think it it was additional guidance regarding defining ecosystem component species and, what types of measures are constitute management versus those that don't. And I was just curious if we ever got a response to that letter.
Michelle, I don't remember a response. Julia, did we get a response to that letter?
Hello, I'm frantically trying to open up my files to see if we got an official response. I don't remember off the top of my head, but if we did, it was something that, it's not fully fleshed out. I think we still need to kind of work with Garfo to figure out some of the details on that.
So Michelle, we'll look and see if we did get a letter. I don't know if there's anyone on the line from Garfo, if they could just indicate that they sent us a letter. Again, I don't remember one, so I don't think we got one.
Mike Petney? Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, to Michelle's question, the letter was to Garfo, not headquarters. We're still working on a response.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks, Mike. Anything else? Any other questions or comments on Bluefish? Okay, seeing none. Mike, I assume your hand's still up from your previous comment. Let's go ahead and move on, Chris, to golden and blue line top.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a list there related to both golden and blue line tilefish. All those things are completed, including specs for 2023 to 2024 for goldens, developing the 2022-2024 blue line specs, advisory panel fishery performance reports that we do every year. We will review the performance of private recreational tilefish permitting and reporting by the end of the year. This meeting, we did support management track assessments for goldens. We initiated a golden tilefish multi-year specification framework and expect to have that completed by the end of the year. It's submitted, and we are and have reviewed a 2020 tilefish survey report and are looking at possibilities for 2022. Any questions about that?
Any questions for Chris? All right, seeing none. Let's go ahead and move on to mackerel, squid, butterfish, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lots going on in squid, mackerel, butterfish world in 2021. And here's a long list there for you to look at, including reviewing our 2022 mackerel, chub mackerel, longfin, and butterfish specs, developing 2022 ILX specs, considering modifications to the incidental possession limit, considering modifications to the butterfish minimum size regulations. None of those were resulted in changes by the council, by the way, as indicated by that box on the right-hand side. We developed advisory panel fishery performance reports, reviewed the butterfish cap again. We'll hear about this HMS chub mackerel diet study at this meeting this week. We supported a management track assessment for mackerel. We supported research track assessments for butterfish and squid. There are a mackerel rebuilding 2.0 framework that's in progress and modification of the 2021 ILX quota. Both of those were additional items that we didn't expect at the beginning of 2021. Any questions about any of that?
Any questions for Chris? A lot going on with mackerel, squid, butterfish.
That's for sure.
Yep. Okay, I don't see any hands, Chris.
Shad River Herring. Okay, Shad.
Yep, Shad and River Herring's next. Go ahead.
Shad River Herring review the cap performance and update. That's completed. There's this run count story map that carried over from 2020 that is completed as well.
Any questions on that? Any comments? Jason?
Just noting on that River Herring Shad update, it contained a spatial economic analysis that the council had discussed and I had suggested getting for several months that had higher river herring and shad catch. I requested it in the back and forth of the analysts for the full year. I've kind of reached out to them. I don't think having it for the full year will be wasted effort, because thinking more really need it for both to understand potential impacts. So I've kind of initiated a discussion with those analysts to update that to also include the kind of more focused time period for when there was higher river herring and shad catch. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Anyone else? All right, I don't see any other hands. Chris, let's move on to spiny dogfish.
So we will, thank you, Mr. Chair, we'll be dealing with spiny dogfish this week, including the 2022 spiny dogfish specs, advisory panel fishery performance report. We're going to review that. There is a spiny dogfish triplet white paper that says completed. That's still in review. Jason, you can speak to that in a second. Also support 2022 research track assessment for spiny dogfish. Jason, you want to talk about the dogfish triplet white paper real quick?
Just that, we looked at some price data across the trip limit changes. Didn't seem to be anything huge going on there, but there was discussion about trip limits at the committee, and that will be kind of a separate topic tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Questions for us regarding spiny dogfish?
Any questions? All right, I don't see any hands, Chris.
Okay.
Surf
Surf
clam,
clam.
ocean quahog.
Surf clams and ocean quahogs. Again, short little list there. Review 2022 specs for surf clam and quahogs. Develop the performance reports. We continue to work on an action to address issues related to separation requirements for those two species. We also expect that we will be looking at the surf clam genetic study final report in 2022. So that's been an ongoing activity for a couple of years. Any questions about surf clam and ocean quahog?
Any questions? Okay, seeing no hands. Science and research be next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Convene a workshop to review and consider redevelopment of the research set-aside program. We've actually have scheduled or have had 3 webinar workshops, and they're scheduling, working on our schedule for that last in-person workshop. My understanding is that in-person workshop was postponed until early next year. So in fact, we can make that a true in-person workshop. Adam and Matt have been very busy working with other folks, including members of the research set-aside or the research steering committee, and have had a lot of activities related to RSA. So we will be expecting in 2022, and we'll get to this in a little bit, a report to indicate any recommendations regarding how we handle a potential research set-aside program for the Mid-Atlantic Council. We have scheduled for the December council meeting a review of our research priorities, something that is planned. We have completed the joint council SSC meeting. We have a SSC economic work group that is providing input into the RSA review. That's in progress. We continue to support GARFO's fishery dependent data initiative. We have established an SSC ecosystem work group to work with the council on a number of activities related to their reports and how they're integrated into our activities. Jason continues to work with folks to get this video project done in Ocean City. That was something that was added in early 2021. It wasn't something that we expected. And we have completed a peer review of the recreational fishing models that might be useful to us later in the year, definitely next year, as we consider recreational management measures for some of the flounder scup and black sea bass and maybe even bluefish. Any questions about that?
Anyone have any thoughts, questions, comments? Adam Nowalski?
So just a comment for everyone here that is listening in. Chris, appreciate your comments regarding the work Matt and I have done on the RSA workshops. Would be remiss to not include Dr. Duvall in those comments as vice chair for the last year. At worst, she's done as much as work as Matt and I, and quite possibly more. And I look forward to her taking over as chair of the committee, and believe that her and I remain committed with myself as vice chair to continuing to work together, but did want to recognize her efforts as well. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Adam. Appreciate that. And thanks, Michelle, for all your efforts on putting together those workshops. Any other comments, thoughts, questions? Okay, seeing none at this time, let's go ahead to EOP and Habitat. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have developed and reviewed the 2021 EAFM Risk Assessment Report. We continue to coordinate the Northeast Regional Habitat Assessment. That's something that's been in progress for several years. We expect that to be completed in 2022. We are waiting to continue work on the essential fish habitat redo, given the completion of the Northeast Regional Habitat Assessment. So that's something that we will initiate or continue working on in 2022. We continue to maintain the joint WIN webpage that we have with the New England Council. We continue to develop lots and lots of habitat and fishery-related comments related to offshore energy development. And I want to thank Kate, as an aside, for her efforts in helping us review those letters as they, it seems like every week we have a poem letter or a letter to somebody regarding a new wind project. So thank you very much, Kate, for helping us with that. We continue development of East Coast Climate Change and Distribution Shift Scenario Planning Initiative. Even though Kylie is out of the office taking care of her baby, Brandon has picked up that activity. That is in progress. We expect a lot more work on that in 2022. And finally, we've had discussions this week about threat hearing and that EFP application. We'll hear more about that this week during the rest of the council meeting. That's an activity that we expect to continue into 2022 as well. Questions?
Any questions for Chris? All right, seeing none, Chris. We've got a few more items here before us. Let's go ahead to general, and then we'll move on to communication and outreach.
Okay, I'll do both of those together. General review, every year we review commercial landings of unmanaged species. Something that has evolved over time, and we've been getting those reports and basically using them to guide any potential activities related to unmanaged species. We did complete new advisory panel reappointments for all APs. BAC took action this morning on a dogfish AP that we'll hear more about later. We developed comment letters to a number of agencies regarding EO 13921 recommendations. We also participated in CC working groups and a number of subcommittees with the CCC. And that's on there. We didn't have that on there in early 2021 or late 2020 when we put the list together, but it has taken up considerable staff work. So we thought it was important to put that there. Those include work groups or subcommittees related to habitat, area-based management, and legislative work groups as well. One big thing that we thought we should put on the list is the transition to WebEx. So I think WebEx has served us well. Obviously, very important for our virtual meetings. And that was an important task for us to complete. Continuing on, continue to implement the outreach plan, maintain the web pages, and develop fact sheets and outreach materials as needed. We did establish a communication advisory panel. We have conducted in-person workshops. We're still planning on workshops to support commercial EBTR implementation. Those have gone extremely well, by the way. And we continue to maintain our list, our issue-specific email distribution list in general. With that, any questions?
Any questions for Chris? Dewey Himmelwright.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Dewey.
I was curious about where the 30 by 30 initiative from this administration, where that would come into play for our 2022 workload or thought process. Any comment on that?
I can provide some idea. Maybe Eric we can also jump in here. It's a little uncertain at this point. The CCC working group is considering exactly what that could mean for us, and it's morphed into this area-based management work group that Eric, I think, still leads, and certainly Eric or Jessica, if you're on the line, you can tell us more about where you're at with that particular work group. Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Moore. Good morning. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Perfect. So, yeah, the CCC did put together a working group to compile an atlas of council managed actions for consideration on the 30 by 30. There is a report that will be given on Tuesday of the CCC meeting, which is in a couple of weeks, and that will be a report from the working group to the CCC. So that is a CCC project, but I am sure that anyone who's interested can tune into that particular conversation. And Jessica Coakley did an exemplary job for that working group and representing your council especially, but she's been a tremendous help to the group in general. So I want to thank her for that. Maybe she has some comments.
No, thank you for the props on that,
Yeah,
Eric. I appreciate that. But yeah, it's really a team effort. There's a lot of information to be pulled together, and the subcommittee is doing a great job.
Okay, thank you, Eric.
Right, yeah, thanks, Eric. Thanks, Jessica. Anything else for Chris on those two topics or those two deliverables sections? Jeff Kalen. Oh,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Jeff, you. Let me let's wrap. We're going to wrap up here with one more section, and then I'm going to let the audience. I'm going to give the members of the public an opportunity to weigh in on everything we discussed. So can
yeah,
you
okay,
for just a minute.
Yeah, that's no problem at all. I'll stand by. I kind of got lost as to where you were, to be honest with you. So thank you.
Okay, yeah, just stand by. I'll get back to you in just a sec. All right, Chris, let's wrap it up here with the staff wrap up on completed council actions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, Jeff, we're still reviewing the 2021 activities, and then we'll get into the 2022 here shortly. One of the things that we started doing is adding this section here, staff wrap up on completed council actions, just to indicate that even though we anticipated something that we said this is completed in 2020, it actually required additional work into 2021 as we went back and forth with edits and some considerations from GARFO as we completed the package. So this one relates to ILX permit and the squid mackerel butterfish goals and objectives amendment. Down below are possible additions. Each year we have a category, basically put things into that relate to possible items that we might get to if we have time or resources allow. So these were the ones that we put into this category last year, and didn't get to any of them except for the right whale issue right there in the middle. And that's, we'll have more clarity on exactly what we might expect on right whale issues at this meeting this week. But there's things in there related to the stock assessment process, We continue to kick this can down the road related to red crab and lobster fishery exemptions for the deep sea coral protected zone. That's something that we will have to do at some point. And we'll talk about it as it relates to 2022 as well. There's this thing about a white paper on fixed variable cost employment information. That's something that we've been talking about for a while. We never have made any progress or have any traction on that particular one. And we haven't modified the list of species from the managed forage amendment. So, each year we've talked about adding some species, and we haven't done anything with that. So that's it for 2021. Obviously, this isn't everything that we've done in 2021. This is the highlights, represents the major issues, major activities. My staff, your staff's extremely busy supporting other entities like the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission and some other things that they do that aren't on this particular list. So we had a very productive, very busy year and got a lot accomplished. In fact, when you look at the things that we said we were going to do, we got most of them done. So a good year all around, even with the limitations imposed by COVID and all the frustrations associated with that. So that's it for 2021, Mr. Chair. I'll be glad to entertain any additional questions before we move on to 2022.
All right, thanks so much, Chris, for that, walking through that with us. Before I go to the audience, members of the public, let me see if does anyone from the executive committee have any follow-up questions for Chris on anything he presented at this time? Okay, I don't see any hands from members of the executive committee. Let me ask those members of the council who are with us today that are not part of the executive committee. Does anyone have anything that they want to bring up to Chris? Any questions or comments on all the different topics that Chris discussed with us? Okay, I don't see any hands at this time. So let me go out to the public. This is an opportunity for the public to address anything that was just discussed over the last half an hour or so as far as 2021. Jeff Kalin, go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the executive committee and other people on the call here. First of all, I'm really glad we're not in Manhattan today. No offense to New Yorkers, but it's my least favorite place in the world to be. So in this case, I'm glad we're electronic. But what I wanted to say, Mike, is I wanted to just point out to the council members and the executive committee how much help the staff continues to be with the Marine Stewardship Council certification process. Several of your species are under have been certified for the last 5 years in their annual audits. We worked with Jason on squid and Jessica on habitat. This year, Chris has given us access to staff on a SCUP evaluation, and Carson's been very valuable and really doing a lot of great work outside of the things that you see on the list here. Jessica with habitat again, and this year Jose on enforcement, where additional enforcement evidence has become an issue for MSC. So I just wanted to thank Chris and his staff and the council for allowing them to support the industry's work in certifying some of these fisheries. And in our case, we're working with Sea Freeze and the town dock. So I just wanted to do a shout out for the staff support and just say that that's all above and beyond what you see on the list that we've just discussed. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jeff. We do have an amazing staff, and I appreciate your willingness to give them some kudos for the work that they do. They're an amazing group, and we get a lot done. As Chris said, this is just a list of highlights. This isn't everything. So it's pretty amazing. each year when I look through these documents, it blows my mind how much work gets done in a year. And yeah, they should be congratulated. So thanks for your comments, Jeff. I appreciate it. Anyone else from the public have anything that they want to ask Chris about or staff about regarding what was presented for 2021 deliverables? Okay, I do not see any hands at this time. So Chris, if you're ready, I think what we can do next is walk through 2022. This is an opportunity for members of the executive committee to consider prioritizing actions for 2022. As Chris mentioned, there are some things that are considered possible actions each year. And this is, I'll speak for Chris. I mean, he always says, this of the 60 items that are under the different headings here, that is what's possible. If you want to remove something from one of the 60 items and add either item 61 through 64, there's going to have to be a give and take. And so this is something to consider as we walk through this, whether or not you want to rearrange priorities for 2022. So I want to open it up to Chris right now. And I think what we'll do, we'll spend a little more time going through each item. I'll go ahead and ask for council members or executive committee members' comments, council members' comments, and then the public on each section as we work through it. And we'll just take our time. We still have 2 hours before our lunch break. So we'll just work through it step by step. And with that, Chris, I'm going to turn it back over to you to take us through it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you and Jeff for your kind comments. So as Mike just indicated, what we are attempting to do today is, number one, get through this list, and number two, have an action at the end of the review after we have public comment as to exactly what we're recommending to the council in December. So over the last several years, we've had a really interactive discussion that really has supported some modifications and support of the document that I think have been extremely helpful. So I'm looking forward to that sort of exchange today as we go through each one of these sections. As Mike indicated, what I'll do is I'll just do section by section. I'll go through these a little bit slower than I did for the 2021 stuff, because we really need to have a complete understanding of exactly what we plan to do here. I expect a couple things in 2022. Number one, I expect that we'll be fully staffed. This year we have Kylie, who's out on maternity leave until the end of October. At the end of October, Matt is going to start, hopefully, his paternity leave that takes us through the end of the year. So we have some staffing things that we're talking about for this year. And I expect, again, that in 2022, everyone will be back at work and working on all these things that we have on this list. The other thing that comment relates to is, in fact, that we are limited, right? So we do have limitations in terms of resources, time, money, staff. And this list that we're presenting to you this morning represents a full workload. So this is a full plate of activities. We understand, just like we had in 2021, some additional items that pop up during the year. We expect that there will be things that will pop up during the year in 2022 that we'll have to address. This is the best, our sense of what 2022 could look like at this point in time. As Mike indicated, the other important part of our discussion is that as you consider some alternatives or some additional items, depending on what they are, if they're substantive, then we're going to have to drop something from the top of the list to replace that particular item. So keep that in mind as we go through this. Staff is on the call with me today to answer any specific questions related to any technical issues. And with that, let's start. So the first grouping relates to summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass. We'll be reviewing in 2022. We'll be reviewing the 2023 specifications for those species. We'll also be developing our 2023 recreational management measures. We'll be developing an advisory panel fishery performance reports. We expect a good evaluation of commercial scup discards in the gear restricted areas for the council to look at in 2022. We don't expect to have the data limitations that we had in this year, so that should be a good review. That review is important because we do have ability to modify those gear restricted areas. In fact, we are in a situation where discards are extremely high, not extremely, but high, and we have to take some action relative to those. So again, that's an important review, important evaluation. We expect to complete the recreational harvest control rule framework / addendum. Remember, this is a joint action with the commission. We'll be talking about that timeline at our next council meeting, which is October 21, with the ASMC Policy Board. We will continue to develop an amendment to consider recreational sector separation. This is something that we promised as a result of our ongoing actions related to the allocation amendment. So that was something that was pulled out. We'll continue that activity. We will continue development of a framework action and technical guidance documents to address the other things that are in the recreational reform initiative. So remember, Julia presented a document to you. We had these items in separate bins, and those bins included frameworks and technical guidance document, and other things to consider, including the harvest control rule. So the focus right now is on the harvest control rule, but we hope to pick up the other things in those bins in 2022. We will be supporting a 2022 research track assessment for black sea bass. We're looking forward to that. As I indicated in my discussion with you relative to what was going on in 2021, we will take a look at the commercial minimum mesh size regulations for summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass. The other thing we're going to take a look at are the exemptions, especially for summer flounder. Those things that are getting, they've been around for a while. And although we do a quick review of those each year, it's time for a more thorough review. And I think that evaluation is important for the council and the board to consider as we move forward in 2022. We expect that we will complete the ecosystem approach to fisheries management strategy evaluation for summer flounder in 2022 as well, and have that for the council to look at. With that, Mr. Chair, I'd be glad to entertain any suggestions, questions relative to summer flounder, scup, black sea bass.
All right, thanks, Chris. Before I go, give everyone a minute to give some thought to this. I'm sure we'll get some hands, but I did have a question for you. I'm a little confused about connectivity between what was in the 2021 actions, which would be to complete the summer flounder, scup, black sea bass commercial recreational allocation amendment, which I know is planned for final action in December. But then we have the harvest control rule that's going to be worked on into 2022 for some finalization of that. And, I don't know how many months ago it was or how many meetings ago it was. There was a decision to put a halt on the sector allocation amendment so that we could possibly so that we could replace that concept with the harvest control rule. And I feel like, do we need to do both? If we're going to complete the sector allocation amendment to address the disconnect between commercial and recreational harvest or landings as it relates to the changes in MRIP and the recalibrations over time, how does the harvest control rule then play into, because that was supposed to be part of the fix, and if the sector allocation amendments completed, where does the harvest control rule fall in there? It's almost like we're doing two of the same thing in some way, in my mind. I just thought maybe I'd pick your brain and see what you thought about that.
So there are two very separate things. And I think we've had a number of conversations with the board and the council about that very specific issue. So if you remember back earlier in the year when we were considering what we wanted to do with the allocation amendment, I think it was actually very early in the year, February maybe, where we talked about, well, we need to wait on this particular decision, these allocation decision, until we get through some of this additional work related to recreational reform, right? So through time, we made the decision to postpone, delay, move this forward in time until this being the allocation amendment to December. So right now on our schedule, we have that where we're going to make the final decision related to that. We got very close to that decision earlier in the year after postponing it. Actually had documents provided to the council and the board that were very complete documents. Documents that had staff recommendations related to those, potential action related to the allocations for those 3 species. And again, the vote was delayed. We all decided as a group to move to December. I think we need to take action on that document in December, one way or the other. I think we either decide that we maintain status quo, or we pick one of the alternatives that are currently in the document. The other part of it, remember, is that we actually went out to the board and the council and asked for some additional alternatives that we said we would include in the document. In fact, those will be included for consideration in December. The same time as that's moved forward, we've also been working, we being Julia primarily, has been working on the rec reform stuff, being the harvest control rule primarily. And we'll have more discussion about that in October. This is October, but October 21, when we meet with the SMSA board. So that discussion may lead to changes in how we want to handle that allocation amendment in December or not.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's still somewhat in flux, but we do have to make decisions, and we do have to decide how this is all going to work out. And to date, the decision has been to postpone a decision on the allocation amendment until our December meeting with the SMFC board.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'll look forward to those discussions. The way I see it is, no matter what gets done at this point, I can't imagine that there would be any changes to allocations or even an implementation of a harvest control rule until 2023, just with the timing of how rulemaking would be, mid-season type of thing. So I'll look forward to those discussions with the board on harvest control rule. And I do agree, we need to make a decision about which one we're going to prioritize, either the recreational reform initiative or the allocation sector allocation amendment forward. So thanks, Chris. That helps me put it into just to try to plan for what's coming up in the next few months. I appreciate it. Any other questions or comments for Chris on summer flounder, scup, black sea bass from any member of the council at this point? Okay, I don't see any hands. Does anyone from the audience or the public have anything they want to ask about or provide any comments on regarding this section of 2022's actions and deliverables? Okay, I don't see any hands, Chris. So I think we can move on to bluefish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So several items there under in the bluefish category, including review the 2023 specifications for bluefish, develop the 2023 recreational management measures for bluefish. Again, we continue to do the advisory panel fishery performance reports. We'll also be supporting a 2022 research track assessment for bluefish, which is important. There's if you've looked at the documents that Matt has put together, there's a number of issues related to the assessment of bluefish, not the least of which include recreational discards and some commercial discard issues as well. So those will be addressed importantly in this research track assessment. Note also that the items listed at 5, 6, and 7 also address bluefish recreational management issues. And with that, pretty straightforward. Questions about bluefish or comments?
Any questions on bluefish for Chris? Any members of the council? Any members of the public? Greg DiDomenico, I saw your hand up right when we moved on to bluefish. Did you want to step back and provide any thoughts on summer flounder, scup, black sea bass? I missed you by about 2 seconds. I don't know if you still want to make comment, but if you do, I'll certainly provide that opportunity for you. Okay, Greg, I don't see your hand, so I guess you'll hold that comment for another time. All right, seeing no hands at this time, Chris, let's go ahead and move to golden and blue line tilefish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, a number of items below that in that category of golden and blue line tilefish, including specifications, reviewing 2023 specifications for both species, developing an advisory panel, fishery performance reports for both species. We'd like to look at the performance of the recreational tilefish permitting and reporting, just to see where we're at with that, how that's going. We will be hopefully conducting a 2022 tilefish survey, depending on funding and logistics for that particular activity. So we still have to wait and see how that's all going to play out. One thing that we have to do as a result of FMP requirements is to initiate a 5-year ITQ program review, which is something that we've done in the past. So a very quick list of questions, comments about tilefish.
Dewey Hemmelwright. Go ahead, Dewey.
Yeah, thank you for that. And on the bullet point 18 about the review of the performance, what happens if when we get the performance report here and it's basically kind of non-existent or very limited? What would we do then? Continue on the same path, or is there a game plan for some compliance assistance, or what's going to be the process? Because I know it takes a few years to get stuff up to par, but I'm just curious as well what the outcome's going to be about how low a participation is. And my second question is there any thoughts on another blue line tilefish survey that might be more directed or pinpointed on species abundance versus the last one that was kind of, in my opinion, it didn't show very much, which I probably had some few issues with site selection, and I'm just that's my 2 questions, I guess, and my comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Dewey. So in terms of the private permitting and reporting, we're going to hear about that this week. So we'll get a sense of where we're at with that this year. And if we start having indications, the conversation this week leads us to conclude things aren't working very well, then we should start having that conversation about, well, what are we going to do about it, right? So I'm with you on that. I'm not, I don't think we're there. We have to come up with something new, but certainly that's something we can talk about this week. The survey has been, I don't know if I'd say, I guess I'd use the word kind of bumpy in terms of basically trying to figure out exactly what we can do and when we can do it. And remember, it's a little fuzzy that Matt or Jose can help me with this, but we had sort of the pre-survey thing where we basically came up with a design that we thought would work very well, got into issues related to funding and how a future survey is going to get done, modified the process a little bit, ended up with a survey, and now we're thinking about doing it again in 2022. But I would say that if there's issues related to how that survey was done, or issues related to potential corruption of results, and that it's not going to be useful, again, it's something that we need to talk about sooner rather than later. Matt, if you're on, can you tell us where we're at with that survey?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So yeah, Dewey, great questions. As you know, the pilot study that we conducted, I believe it was in 2018 now or 2019. That one targeted obviously both golden and blue line. And the results of that study were very positive for the golden sides of things and not so positive for blue line. We didn't catch as many. And part of this was because of the strata that were surveyed and the depth that the species are at, as well as their distribution. And through some of the conversation with Science Center staff that helped develop the logistics of the survey, they noted that the cost of the survey would be much, much higher to look at both golden and blue line. So the next survey that we did last year was just for golden tilefish. We've gone through all of the data, everything there, and are looking to continue that survey. And we did just meet not too long ago with Science Center staff again to talk about, how the logistics may change moving forward for an additional golden survey. And we did talk about blue line as well again, but tied to all of that is the funding side of things. The survey would have to be much longer. The strata would have to be wider. Just a lot more would be involved, but it is something we're considering. And we've also been in contact with Southeast Fisheries Science Center staff about their longline surveys and how we can potentially link things up. So it is something we're actively thinking about. However, what we're doing with the Mid-Atlantic survey is most likely looking like it's going to continue to be geared towards just golden tilefish. But would be happy to touch base with you at any point offline to kind of hear some of your thoughts. So thank you.
Yeah, follow up, please.
Yeah, go ahead, Dewey.
Yeah, I would follow up offline because I believe that there's got to be a better way, and the pilot program also was the deciding factor. And I would beg to differ of the targeting of the blue lines because it's only in certain places. And it also was the deciding factor in how north of Cape Hatteras the distribution was partitioned out 56% in the Mid-Atlantic and 44%. But I believe there's an ongoing need for a discussion with both the Southeast and the Northeast to get on the same page of a survey that would work, that might not cost us nowhere near as much money as particular to the golden tilefish, but I'll be following up offline with that. Thank you.
All right, I appreciate that, Dewey. Dr. John Hare. Go ahead, John.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Dewey, for the comments. There was a workshop a month or so ago, Northeast Fisheries Science Center, Southeast Fisheries Science Center, and this survey and coordinating, just the way you explained it, was sort of a topic which we discussed at that workshop. The director of the Southeast Fisheries Science Center and myself put in a budget request for FY23 to coordinate on a longline survey. Obviously, we don't know the outcome of that request, but I think it's good for us all to be thinking in that same direction that you laid out, that this is a cross fisheries management council issue that we, blue line in particular, that we need to work on together. So thank you for the comments.
Okay, thanks, John. Any other comments? Any other questions on tilefish? Okay, seeing none. Let's go ahead, Chris, and move on to mackerel, squid, butterfish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A number of items below that in that particular category related to those species, including the development of fishery performance reports. We'll also be looking at a longer time series for chub mackerel specs, 2023 through 2025. Remember, this week we're looking at 2022 specs for that particular species. We will complete the mackerel rebuilding framework. That framework, as designed, will include the 2023 to 2024 specifications. So that'll be that document will deal with a number of issues, including the specs. 2023 to 2024 butterfish specs. We also have to develop We'll be looking at our previous decisions on longfin squid and LX, and also developing the 2023 specifications for LX. And we'll also also have staff support for these important research track assessments for butterfish and LX. Also, I'll add, since river herring and shad is only one item, we'll also be developing the 2023-2024 shad and river herring caps via that macro rebuilding framework as well. So any questions or comments about items 21 through 28?
Any questions, comments for Chris? Sarah Winslow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe I heard Chris say this went through item number 28.
That's
But
correct.
Jason mentioned earlier relative to the spatial work report that had been completed relative to shad and river herring. And I was wondering if the redo of that, looking at a specific time period, would impact as it relates to the 2022 deliverables as far as the cap.
Thank you, Sarah. I think, Jason, you want to address that? You and I have had a conversation about that. So why don't you fill us in?
Sure. The conversation I had with Chris was that it might make sense to have like a river herring shad committee and AP meeting to kind of discuss those results that hopefully we're able to get updated, and then the council could kind of use that information in December when it's finalizing deliverables, in case there's the idea with that analysis was always, based on that, it seemed like it'd be worth pursuing some kind of spatial restrictions on some fishery related to reducing river herring and shad catch. So assuming we can get that analysis updated, I think it's mostly an automated process, but I'll have discussions with the Science Center staff who did that, and then hopefully swing around to a committee and AP meeting, and then that could inform the council in December.
And just to add to that, Sarah, so basically my understanding, Jason, tell me if I'm wrong, is that we will make a final determination related to 2022 work once we see that in December.
That's what I was thinking might make sense, yes.
Okay, and between now and December, we'll also have a committee meeting to go over that as well.
Sarah, did you have a follow-up to those comments?
Just, did we ever get a response from the Science Center when we requested a potential method for biological cap development?
Turn to Jason on that one, Jason.
Yeah, we had some back and forth, and the request was to kind of assist with scoping, through the monitoring committee process, and kind of noted in the river herring and shad cap update that when the monitoring committee folks are kind of meeting in this spring to talk about river herring and shad cap in that macro rebuilding framework, the plan was to revisit that. And again, it wouldn't be so much, an analytical task at this point, more of a scoping task, giving, we had some discussions. It seemed like a non-trivial task. So would have some additional discussions through the monitoring committee in the spring about, again, scoping out how you might be able to do it. The center's doing some kind of related research that may play into it. So anyway, scoping the process out in the spring as we're leading into the macro rebuilding framework is a plan to further discuss that issue.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Does anyone from the public have anything that they'd like to ask regarding mackerel, squid, butterfish, or river herring and shad. Greg DiDomenico.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. May I ask a quick question of Jason, please?
Of course.
Jason, can you hear me okay?
You're good.
Do all of your analyses regarding river herring and shad bycatch include every gear type? Southern New England, Mid-Atlantic, all regions, all gear types?
I think the analysis is since most of the landings were coming in midwater trawl and small mesh bottom trawl, that's the gear type that we're thinking might potentially, be looked at. So that's what we asked for in their analysis, is focused on small mesh bottom trawl and midwater trawl.
Do you think, given the drastic reductions in in Atlantic mackerel and Atlantic herring, how can you adjust your analysis to compensate for, what could be a moratorium on one and what is about a 90% reduction in the quota in another?
I think the analysis of where revenues, came from and where river herring and shad catch has been would be, that's just what happened in a certain time period. But I mean, I think that the quotas for those species and resulting overall caps on effort, I think would just, those are known. And I think, I can imagine the council considering that as, prioritizing actions.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your question, Greg. Anyone else from the public have anything else they want to ask? Okay, I don't see any hands at this time. Let's go ahead, Chris, and we can move on to spiny dogfish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a couple of things under spinies. Support the 2022 research track assessment and develop the 2023 through 2026 specifications. So that's a 4-year specification cycle. We talked about changes to these specification cycles before. So this is something new for us. We'll be talking about spiny dogfish this week. So potentially there might be something that pops up that we need to address as well in 2022, but at least at this point, that's what we have. And if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, I'll go to surf clam and ocean quag, just since there's only a couple things there and then stop.
Yep, go ahead.
Surf clams and ocean quags, we have 4 things there, including review the 2023 specifications, develop the advisory panel performance reports. We hope to continue. The hope part is that I actually finish this, but also, and most importantly, continue work on it as it relates to the surf clam and ocean quag species separation requirements. And finally, we'll be looking at that surf clam genetic study that's been ongoing for a couple of years. Any comments or questions about spiny dogfish, surf clams, or ocean quags?
Yeah, Chris, this might be obvious. I just want to ask though. So the 2022 research track assessment, will that be completed in time for us by October so that we can have that assessment information to help inform the specification setting for those 4 years?
I don't think so, but I'm going to turn to Jason. Jason?
Yeah, that may slide into after October, but I think the process to start developing those specs will certainly commence in 2022. And yeah, the timing just depends on, I think it's spinning into a management track immediately after. Might turn to Brandon for the exact timing of that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'll jump in. Jason's right. So the research track assessment is scheduled for July of 2022. The plan would be then to roll That assessment, assuming it passes peer review, would then go into a management track assessment in September of 2022. So we'll need to figure out the process with the SSC and sort of, how we get them to review the results of the assessment and provide ABC recommendations. But I think we'll be ready for everything in 2022. It's just going to be, I think, slightly off of our typical schedule, but everything will be ready in 2022.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that information. Does anyone else have any questions regarding spiny dogfish or surf clam and ocean quahog? For Chris or staff? Any members of the council, executive committee? Anyone from the public have any questions that they'd like to ask? James Fletcher. Go ahead, James.
Are we going to ever address a male fishery in any of this? It's been kicked down the road forever. It's cutting the production of the fish down. Oh, we're going to do it the next assessment. We're going to do it later. And the question is, since it's to protect, the plan is written to protect the female biomass, could it be considered to allow a unregulated male fishery for 5 years? Read the thing. The original plan says to protect the female biomass. Could the council or whoever allow a 5-year fishery on males without a plan or until a plan was put in? Thank you.
All right, thanks, James, for your question. Let me go to Jason. Got his hand up. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, the model that they're trying to run should, the hope is, right, it can do reference points and for both males and females. So this current assessment is attempting to address that issue. And then depending on what it kicks out, if it passes peer review, I'm not sure exactly if it might be something that would be able to run directly through specs or through a framework. We'd have to kind of see exactly what the results are.
All right, thanks, Jason. Anyone else from the public? Any other public comment or questions? Okay, seeing none at this time, let's go ahead, Chris, and we'll move on to science and research.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A number of items below science and research. We expect that the RS Research Steering Committee will present a report to the council on their recommendations based on the final workshop that we hope to have at early 2022. Those recommendations will include whether and how to redevelop the Mid-Atlantic Research Set-Aside Program. The other thing that is on our to-do list for 2022 is to look at the membership of the SSC. We have 16 members whose membership is coming up, and we'll be looking at those folks. Process there will include Brandon reaching out to them in early December, basically to see if in fact they're still interested in serving on the SSC. Typically the response is yes, we all want to continue to serve on the SSC, but it's hard to say at this point what we might get. If in fact we have some indication that there are folks that do not wish to continue their membership, then we'll solicit new membership and have the council look at that in February. We also plan to do a joint council SSC meeting like we did this year. I think those meetings serve us well. It's a good way to get the SSC together with the council to hear about common issues and talk about potential things that the SSC can do. Again, we'll plan to do that in 2022. Remember that we have these two work groups, an ecosystem work group and an economic work group. So we'll hear from those folks in 2022. There's this wonky thing in number 40 that says support 2023 applying state space model research track assessment. And I'm not exactly sure what state space model research is, but I'm sure Brandon can tell you if in fact you have any questions about that. And then this is number 41 is something that we've talked about for a couple of years. We had some delays this year because of COVID and some issues with video cameras and that kind of thing, but we actually expect that project related to the Maryland Recreational Ocean effort is going to be available, and we'll see a report in 2022. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm glad to answer any questions or hear any comments about science and research.
All right. Kate Wilkie. Go ahead, Kate.
I will take you up on your offer to ask Brandon what a state-based model research track assessment is.
I was hoping someone would ask.
Yeah, thanks.
Brandon?
That's a good question. That's what I'm hoping to learn as I join the group. And we're just starting to get this group together. This is some of as the NRCC approved the new stock assessment process for research track assessments, and they have these topic-based assessments. And so last year we did the first one on sort of data limited methods, and so I joined that work group. I thought it was very informative and helpful, and because it has a lot of potential linkages for the SSE. And so now we have this one that's scheduled for 2023. And so it's just a different way of evaluating the data. The Science Center has a state-based model that can handle the data a little bit differently, deal with retrospective issues, deal with some of the data nuances that we have. And so it's a different sort of modeling approach. Again, it's something that I'm going to be learning over the next 2 years. But I think it could have a lot of application to Mid-Atlantic stocks in terms of how we may utilize a model like this going forward. And so I think it has a lot of application to the council and to the SSC in the future.
Okay, I was curious if it was more ecosystem based or single species, but I look forward to learning as well, and I suppose I could look it up. So thanks, Brandon.
All right, thanks, Kate. Thanks, Brandon. John Hare.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just to add a little bit to Brandon's explanation, I think, I'll send just a general description, Kate, so you can sort of look at it. I think one of the real strengths of the modeling approach is it allows for evaluating whether or not there's time varying parameters. So you can sort of look at time varying natural mortality or time varying recruitment. And so it does sort of move us closer to ecosystem-based fisheries management, because it lets you look at whether some of these parameters in an assessment are varying through time. But I'll send just a brief update to you, Chris, and you can share that with council members. But I think it's an important approach which is being developed at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, and it's being sort of going to be used also at a national level. The agency is embarking on a fisheries integrated modeling system to try to sort of come up with a national toolbox for stock assessment models. So this approach will be part of that as well.
All right, appreciate that, John. Dr. Duvall, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe just a quick question for Jason on the Maryland, the Recreational Ocean Effort Video Estimation Project. And Jason, could you see this product feeding into some of our efforts under the Rec Reform Initiative? And I'm sort of specifically thinking about some of those things that were flagged more for, technical guidance with respect to contributing towards, how we handle or estimate outliers, when to use, envelope of uncertainty approaches. Do you see the results of this feeding into that? Thanks.
I mean, I think all I can say is possibly, and I'll admit I'm not super versed in some of the rec reform stuff at the present moment, but might dig into that a bit. I have been communicating. There is another kind of similar effort going on down in Georgia, I think, or Florida, that I've been talking to some folks about. And so, I mean, the general idea was more as kind of some kind of ground truthing, and just another totally separate way to estimate effort, and kind of trying to address some of the of concerns that came out of some of the new effort estimates with the fishing effort survey. But I was just talking to Julia about some of the rec reform issues. So well, at least I'll keep that in mind, and it could, but I'm not sure.
All right, thanks for the question, Michelle, and Jason for your answer. Kate, John, and Michelle, your hands are still up. If you could, unless you have something else you want to offer, if you can put those down and help me out. Thank you. Anyone from the public have anything that they'd like to ask about regarding science and research? All right, I don't see any hands at this time. So Chris, let's go ahead and move on to EOP and habitat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A number of items below in that particular category. So we're on 42 at this point. Maintaining the joint WIN web pages with the New England councils on our list, and also developing more comments on offshore energy development. As I said, we've been, it seems like we've been looking at a letter almost every week, but maybe that's an exaggeration. Certainly a number of letters have gone out related to offshore energy development. We'll continue to do those. We will continue to coordinate the Northeast Regional Habitat Assessment, and actually, hopefully, get it done in 2022. That'll lead to continued work on essential fish habitat, and hopefully completing that in 2023. We'll develop and review the 2022 EAFM Risk Assessment Report. We'll initiate a comprehensive review and update to the EAFM Risk Assessment. It's time to do that. We've had it for a little while. Now it's time to look at it and see how it needs to be updated. And we will continue development of the East Coast Climate Change and Distribution Shift Scenario Planning Initiative. Any questions or comments about any of that?
Any questions for Chris? I'll get to you in just a second, James. Let me ask Chris. So the East Coast Climate Change and Distribution Shift Scenario Planning, do we have a timeline? I'm trying to think the last time we talked about this. I know we were going to try to do some in-person meetings. Has there been anything kind of set forth yet? Or are we still waiting to see kind of how COVID is affecting our ability to move around?
Yeah, we do have a timeline. I don't have it in front of me. Remember that Kylie was a principal staffer involved with that activity and was leading the working group that is part of this initiative. That working group is associated with the NRCC. Right. That working group includes members from all the councils and the commission and the science center in the region. Anyway, most of the activity that we had planned for in-person activities is in 2022 and later in 2022. So I don't have exact dates or exact timelines, but certainly we could provide that to anyone that's interested. Brandon, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think you captured it well. I mean, I think the core team just, we meet weekly, and I think the last week when we met, I think we were thinking the first round of workshops. So there's going to be a series of workshops. And so I think the first round of in-person workshops that we were thinking about would take place in March of 2022. Then there would probably be a series of workshops sometime in the summer of 2022, with hopefully the project wrapping up sometime at the end of 2022. So like Chris said, most of the activities there's going to be a lot of activities taking place in 2022, and hopefully they'll be in person. There's going to be a lot happening between now and March in terms of some additional maybe webinars regarding the scenario planning project, but hopefully those workshops in person, looking at March for the first one.
All right, great. Okay, thanks, Brandon. Thanks, Chris. Let me ask the council members, executive committee members, and other council members if anyone has any questions for Chris or staff regarding EOP and Habitat 2022 deliverables and actions. All right, I don't see any hands from members of the council. We'll go to the public. James Fletcher, I see your hand. Go ahead, James.
Will we ever address PFBAs and the chemicals, the surfactants that are on the surface of the water and how they are affecting the fish? We talk about ocean planning and habitat, but we never talk about the man-made chemicals that we're putting in the water. And it's becoming increasingly clear that these PFBAs, polyvinyls, are affecting the ability of the eggs to hatch. So when will the council instruct somebody, council staff or science center, to look at the chemicals that are affecting the reproduction of the fish? We can talk about habitat all we want to, but if we don't talk about what's in the water, then that's a problem. Thank you for your time.
All right, thanks, James. I'll turn to staff to see if anybody has any response to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Jessica can help me with this as well. It's my understanding that there have been discussions about the influence of man-made contaminants or as it relates to habitat. Jessica, do you want to talk about those conversations?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. So, James, I mean, those issues have come up. We've talked about it a bit based on input you provided to the Northeast Regional Habitat Assessment. You know, one of the challenges with a lot of that contaminant information is, you know, there aren't broad sort of sampling systems kind of look at those contaminants across sort of broad areas where it could be integrated into some of that habitat assessment work. But that doesn't mean those aren't important issues that the habitat groups are aware of, and that are researchers doing at many of the universities, doing research on a smaller scale on these issues more specifically, particularly some of the groups like the EPA and other groups that have a stronger focus on that environmental contaminant component. But those folks are involved in some of our habitat work groups, so these topics do come up. So I'll just highlight that is an issue that folks are aware of. But much like the climate change issue, it's a really big issue, and it's sort of hard to get your hands around all of the information to get a handle on what's actually going on. Is that helpful, Chris?
Yeah, thank you.
Jimmy?
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Okay, seeing no other hands, let's go ahead and move on, Chris, to the next item.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go through the next three categories combined. So starting with general, we'll do our review of commercial landings of unmanaged species, just like we've been doing every year for the last several years. Look forward to that. We also will continue, as staff, will continue to participate in CCC working groups and subcommittees, including those related to habitat, again, area-based management and legislative working groups. That legislative working group may become more important in 2022 as we get into the possibility of Magnuson-Stevens reauthorization legislation and reviews of that, which we were recently involved with. So expect more of that. A big activity for us in 2022 is going to be the May CCC meeting. So it's our turn as a regional council to host that particular meeting. That meeting will be right now an in-person meeting scheduled for Annapolis in late May. Again, requires a lot of staff support in order to make that a successful meeting. So that's on the list. Also, as Jeff Galen indicated, we have and will continue to support information requests and audits for our MSC certified fisheries, including Atlantic surf clams, ocean quahogs, like squid, longfin squid, and spiny dogfish. So quite the list. We expect at some point that SCUP is going to be added to that list as well. So that's general communication and outreach. We will continue to implement the council's communication plan. We will continue to develop, and we being Mary principally, will continue to develop and maintain existing council action web pages. We will develop fact sheets and outreach materials as needed. We will enhance that those email distribution tools to inform and engage stakeholders. We plan to increase the use of website analytics to better understand who's looking at the site and what they're looking at. And for those that don't know this, we do have a YouTube channel, and we're going to continue to grow that. Remember that we also have a new AP, so we hope to integrate the communication AP into some of these, or if not all of these activities. So that's communication outreach. Staff wrap up on completed actions is just the stuff that might roll over into 2022, again, depending on our interactions with GARFO as we submit documents and have reviews of those documents and potential changes. So those would include, we take action on it, the allocation amendment that we talked about earlier. We did take action on the state allocation amendment for black sea bass. Potentially there might be some additional work associated with that in 2022 as well. With that, I'll be glad to answer any questions or take any comments.
Questions or comments for Chris on those three topics? Anyone from the council or the executive committee? Any questions or comments? Okay, I don't see any hands at this time. Let me ask the public. Anyone from the public have anything they'd like to ask Chris or provide any comments on regarding 49 through 60 on the list? All right, Chris, I don't see anybody on my list right now, so let's go ahead and move on. We'll wrap it up with possible additions.
Okay, so we've gone through, very complete list. Looking at items 1 through 60, and those represent, but from a staff perspective, our workload for 2022 as it stands now. This is proposed. This is an opportunity now to really think about some additional items that we didn't include in the stuff from 1 to 60 that you think we should include, or things that you didn't think we really need to include in 1 to 60, we could take off. Certainly that's an option as well. This possible addition category allows for some consideration of some things that we think might be important to the council. We think might come up in 2022 and we'll have to address them. But certainly we should have a good discussion about these items below 60, so 61 through 64. One item that did not appear on the list from our previous list, the list we have for 2022 or 2021, is the red crab lobster exemption for the deep sea coral fishery, or a deep sea coral exemption program, deep sea coral amendment, FMP. So we need to put that in possible additions because that does need to roll over a year. At some point, we're going to have to do that. And in fact, it might be that we're even, approaching the point where we're late based on how that plan was approved. So possible additions at this point include deep sea coral action, also the sea turtle bycatch, Mid-Atlantic Council trawl fisheries. That's something that we just started talking about a little bit. Not quite sure exactly what that's going to entail in 2022. We will have conversations this week about right whales. Again, not really sure what that's going to entail for 2022. One of the things that we put on the list is possession limit for frigate and bullet mackerel. It's down in possible additions because my frigate and bullet mackerel person is going to be fully engaged with things related to rec reform and black sea bass specifications and wind energy development on these coasts. So Potentially, if in fact the council believes that that's an important item for us to move up into the list, we could talk about how that might get done. Also, a little uncertain as to exactly what might happen with this threat herring EFP, but that's on the list for potential action by the council in 2022 as well. There were, Mary, did you have a couple of other things that in a slide that we could put up for folks to look at for other possible additions? There were a couple of things that staff thought that we should also consider for possible additions that we forgot or thought about after the document went to press. And I don't know if you have those or not, Mary, do you? Or someone?
Yep. Sorry, it took me a second to find the unmute button. Give me just 1 second to pull those up.
Okay.
Okay, can you see that?
Yep, thank you.
All right.
So these are this one on threat herring is a refinement of how it looks on the page now. So this is basically, again, depending on how things go with the threat herring EFP, we expect that there will be some additional work if in fact it continues its progress in the system. Also, this other one is a little more involved and certainly would involve a lot more work as it relates to black sea bass, scup, and or bluefish. And this is to take what we're doing for summer flounder in terms of the MSC economic model and apply that to those, potentially apply it to those 3 species. So we have with this addition and the other things that we have on the list, a number of things that we could consider for possible additions. There's several ways to approach this particular category. One is to say, let's just leave them the way they are now as possible additions, see how things progress for the rest of this year, revisit those possible additions in December, and then make changes with the council involved at that point. If in fact there's something on this list that you believe needs to be moved up today, then certainly now's a good time to be talking about that. If there is something that doesn't appear on the list whatsoever, or just does something that we didn't think about, but there's something that's really important to you, or it's something that you think the council should consider, now's the time to add it to the list. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll open it up for comments and questions.
Okay, thanks, Chris. That was good, clear recommendations on the next steps here. I'm going to go to Kate Wilkie, and then Michelle will come to you next. Go ahead, Kate.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have 2 things that will address both of the points that Chris was asking for. So for the first one, coming out of the Ecosystem and Ocean Planning Committee meeting yesterday, I am the new chair of that, and I'm going to give an update tomorrow during the executive director's report, but something that pertains to possible additions for 2022 is there was a bit of hesitancy coming from the committee yesterday to and unsureness of how to approach the review of this EFP, since it's the very first one under the unmanaged forage amendment, and that it's likely to be precedent setting. So Brandon and I talked, and we recommend possibly for the council to think about developing a policy or a process for the council to review EFP applications. And the goal in establishing the policy or the process would be to provide some clarity and guidance as to what the EOP committee and the council should consider when reviewing a new or expanding fishery proposal or EFP application. So, and it was suggested that the Pacific Council has a process that could be referenced as an example. So I propose to consider as a possible addition to the implementation plan, this this whole thing that I just said. I don't have an easy way to sum it up. For the council to consider developing a policy or process to review EFP applications, I guess. And so, and I think what Mary has up here as the first bullet, that's probably separate and important to keep on there as well. So I could let Chris respond to that, and then I have one more point to make.
Yeah, Kate, I'll chime in too as well. So the one thing that we need to be careful about here, I understand that this is the first time that an EFP is kind of, I wouldn't say going against the grain, but it's part of our, omnibus unmanaged forage amendment, and it could set a precedent for moving forward. I just think we need to be careful. There are a lot of exempted fishing permits that are approved throughout the year. I get emails every time there's one that's approved. And, the council could be taking on a lot of additional work and a lot of additional time and coordination in order to provide comments back on all the EFPs that are applied for each year. And maybe I'll turn to Chris to see what he thinks.
Well, and I think I should clarify. So I was kind of doing that on the fly, and I certainly don't mean for the council to review each EFP application. You make a very good point there, Mike. And I think this one is specifically related to EFPs that are for new or expanding fisheries, and maybe that's just on forage species. So. Yeah.
No, I think. I thought that's what you were saying, but it came out more as all EFPs, and I just don't know that that's something that we want to take on. Chris, maybe Chris can offer some thoughts on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think the way that Kate just explained it is appropriate for the council. In other words, a policy and process maybe, for review of EFP applications for new and expanding fisheries would be something that we could accommodate, add to the list, and I think that would be very appropriate.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Is there any objection by members of the council, or I guess at this point, any objection by the executive committee members in adding that bullet, as Chris just mentioned, as Kate just mentioned, to the list of items under possible additions for further consideration by the council in December? Michelle, your hand was up. I assume it's up to make a comment, so I'm not going to consider your hand up as an objection. I don't see any other hands going up for objection to that. So yeah, let's go ahead and add that in some simplified way. Maybe staff can develop a statement there as to Kate's interest in adding that to the list. Thanks, Kate.
Mr. Chairman,
Michelle?
would you like me to type something up to get on the screen? I think I understand the gist of it, but if it would be helpful, I can put something up on the screen.
Yeah, I think that could be good. Just another something to the effect of for consider review of EFPs for new and expanding fisheries. Kate, maybe you can add to it as well.
Sure. I think that's right. New or expanding fisheries. And I don't know if we want to put the word forage in there specifically as it relates to the unmanaged forage amendment. I think so. It would be appropriate.
Yeah, new or expanding fisheries as it relates to the unmanaged forage amendment.
And I also heard in the discussion, part of this would include development of a policy or process for how we would do that.
Right, Mary. So I think that's the problem right now when the Ecosystems Committee was trying to review this application. We were looking for some guidance. So yeah, develop a policy or a process for review. Yeah.
Yeah, that looks good to me. I'll ask one last time. Any objection to adding this to the list for council consideration in December? Okay, seeing none. Thanks, Kate, for your comments. I'm going to go next to Michelle Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, appreciate all the work that Chris and the staff do to try to, you know, cull this list down and, you know, recognizing that there's a tremendous amount of work on everybody's plate. And, you know, so in thinking about this list of possible additions, you know, I'm thinking about the specifically number 63, which, you know, references the possession limit for frigate and bullet mackerel, and, you know, in full recognition of, you know, the overflowing plate of staff who would be involved in that. You know, I'm wondering, Chris, I know with respect to, you know, the one of the items under summer flounder scup black sea bass, and looking at a potential contractor to, you know, look at those mesh size revisions for that fishery. You know, are there other items, whether it's on the possibles list, and, you know, this is one that I'm thinking of, or even, you know, just on the full list that might be appropriate for, say, you know, an external contractor to, you know, tackle this? And you know, another one that seems like it might be appropriate for something like that would also be the expansion of the MSC. But, you know, I'm sort of specifically interested in bullet and frigate. I think there was a lot of work done by, you know, both the South Atlantic and the Mid-Atlantic Council to try to, you know, put the bow on this one. And I, you know, I absolutely understand constraints. I think maybe just trying to look for an alternative way forward that we might be able to consider in December. Thanks.
So, yeah, thanks for that, Michelle. The short answer is yes. So we could do that. And in fact, what we really need to do is get a sense from the executive committee as to how important bullet and frigate mackerel are. Right. So we've had a number of conversations as it relates to our activities for 2022. So we've had a number of conversations. We continue to interact with the South Atlantic Council related to those particular species. They took action. We now have, you know, basically these species back on our plate. One way to address that particular issue would be to take that item, move it back up into the list above, and have it, you know, put back into the category related to, I think we had it in bluefish for 2021, given where we thought an amendment would need to be. So that's one possibility. If in fact you did that, I would say that yes, we would address it through contract with someone outside of staff, because the staff wouldn't have time to do it. So yeah, it's a possibility, and certainly, you know, I'd like to hear from other folks if in fact that's something that they would support.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Let's go through a number of hands that have come up. I know Mike. Let's go to Mike Penny first, because I know he had to get off the call here shortly. Mike, go ahead, and I'll come back to Sarah and Kate. Mike Penny.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually back. I stepped away and came back. I just wanted to note, you know, appreciate the suggestion of, or understand the suggestion of the council hiring a contractor to relieve, you know, the workload on council staff. But for any action, council action, particularly something that's relatively new, you know, it's a team effort. It takes work from council staff, certainly, but it's also really important to have science center staff and regional office staff engaged, you know, from the start with council staff on these actions. And you know, for all of the reasons that Chris said, that, you know, his staff is fully committed, and that, you know, everything through item 60 is a full plate. You know, my staff are overcommitted right now, and I'm pretty sure John Hare would say his staff are overcommitted. We're having conversations about what stock assessments aren't going to get done next year because of resource limitations at the Science Center. And we are facing some potentially significant resource limitations at the regional office. So, you know, we will not have staff to support or resources to support these actions unless something significant comes off the list. And I can't speak for John Hare, but I suspect that his participation would be similarly limited.
All right, I appreciate that, Mike. Since we're talking about frigate and bullet right now, I'm going to go to Chester. Did you have something to add from the South Atlantic perspective, Chester Brewer?
Yes, not to add, but I had a question
Sure.
with regard to this thread herring EFP. We at the South Atlantic, we saw what purported to be sort of a precursor to this EFP, and we decided not to take action at the time because it was deemed not to be a formal application. Has something changed since then, such that, you know, there is in fact a formal application that has been made to trawl thread herring? Thank you. I'll mute myself.
All right, thanks, Chester. I'm going to go to Jeff on that question. Sarah and Kate, just hang tight. I'll get back to you in just a minute. Jeff was one of the applicants who spoke about this during the EOP meeting yesterday. So Jeff, go ahead. You want to?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I heard the kind of ice cold reception we had at the South Atlantic Council with very little notice to us as the applicants that was going to occur. So yeah, it's absolutely in process. We've been working with Allie Pitts up there to formulate the application beyond what we submitted in April. So it's very much a real project, and it doesn't propose to trawl for thread herring. It proposes to purse seine for thread herring, but no further south than Ocean City, Maryland. You know, not within the jurisdiction of the South Atlantic Council. Of course, the council can comment on anything that they would like to. And, you know, in terms of timing, it's our hope that we can get into the Federal Register before the end of the calendar year, Mr. Chairman. And part of that reason is because of the shipping delays in getting twine to build the nets, for example, which is taking a tremendous amount of time. So we're going to need, you know, 3 to 6 months to try to get the gear built and the twine on hand. So it's absolutely in process. Our next step is to go back to Garfo with some of the recommendations that we've heard so far about monitoring and trying to develop a swept area biomass from the data that we've developed. And so, and then finally, I'll just say that I think that the process that you've gone through, Mr. Chairman, in considering our proposal, which we brought early to the council to give everybody a heads up that this clearly is within the law as described in the forage amendment, the process, which is run by Garfo. So we're gonna you know, go back and try to get this thing published, and then the opportunity would be for the council to do what they just did. But I think the process should include just what you've done. You've gone to the SSC, you've gotten a recommendation from the SSC. There's no scientific reason to block this request. And then you've gone to the EOP committee. Obviously, there were different opinions at the committee and with the AP, which I'm privileged to be a member of. I didn't speak as an AP member yesterday. So our hope is that we can get this thing published, and your opportunity to comment would probably be very early in calendar year 2022, and would just kind of be a 2-hour meeting, I guess, like we had yesterday perhaps. But those are my comments. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate that. Sarah Winslow, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to speak relative to frigate and bullet mackerel and agree with what Michelle recommended going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Kate Wilkie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was going to be my second point when I last spoke as well. I think that number 63, to initiate a possession limit for bullet and frigate mackerel is really important, and I am interested in and supportive of pursuing Chris's suggestion to pursue that and possibly move it up the list to do in 2022. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I also know that Tony DeLernia and Dewey, serving as liaisons for the MID down in the South Atlantic, put a tremendous amount of work in to getting us to this point. And if Tony hadn't turned out back in August, I know he would be advocating heavily for the continued progress on this issue. So I think it's a good idea. I think I don't know, Chris, you made a point about where this might fit in, but and I know Mike staffing and time limitations and resource limitations, but do we need to actually move this now, or can we just make a note there and then take this up at the full council level in December?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it would be important for us to give a good sense to the rest of the council as to exactly what, the XCOM was thinking about at this meeting, right? So I understand, Mike Bentley's comments, and certainly understand the staffing issues. And I think that this isn't the last time we're going to be talking about our 2022 implementation plan. We'll be talking about it in December. So considering the possibilities and how best to deal with it, I would suggest to give a clear message to the council as to what the executive committee is thinking about in terms of priorities. We move it up the list into, we could put it back where it was in 2021 under bluefish, leave it there. In terms of possible additions, we would then have turtles, the whale, the thread herring thing, and the MSC language that staff proposed, and leave those in possible additions. And unless there's other changes that we want to talk about over the next half hour or so, that would be the document that we would then transmit to the council as our recommendations for 2022. Between now and December, we could have additional conversations within staff, between staff and Garfo, and certainly you all could think about it as well, as to, well, if we are going to deal with bullet and frigate this way, and there's going to be a staff, there's going to be a staff load requirement that we're going to have to ask the center and the region to fill, then what might we put in a lower priority given all the other things we have on the list? That makes sense. So again, I think I just need that sense from my perspective from the XCOM today. And in fact, what I just said makes sense. If it does, that's what I think we need to do.
Okay. Do you want a motion for that?
We've had motions in the past. And certainly, you could have a straightforward motion that said something like, move this to the council based on the discussions we had today, something like that, with the additions that we considered today and changes.
Okay, so you don't want a motion on the specifics?
No.
Just more about the discussion?
Yeah, I think, again, unless someone else thinks that we need to make a very specific motion, if you feel that way, we can do that too. Move the possible addition item, frigate, bullet, mackerel up into
to bluefish.
Yeah, the bluefish section.
Yeah. I think it would be more clear in my mind, and I think for the public as well when they see the motion. So I think a motion is in order here by the executive committee. I see the motion reading something like you just said, Chris. Move item number 63 to bluefish, move it up to bluefish under the bluefish category, and include additional items discussed today under possible additions, something like that. Because we did add one possible addition. It was Kate's issue about the developing a policy or process for reviewing EFPs as they relate to the omnibus forage amendment. So I think with that said, we've had some discussion on that. Let me see if anyone from the executive committee would like to make that motion. Michelle Duval, is that a motion you'd like to make?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And Kate Wilkie, did you want to support that as a second?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So we have a motion made by Dr. Duval, seconded by Kate Wilkie. Let me see if anyone from the council or the executive committee at this time has any comment that they'd like to provide on this. Mike Pentney.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to oppose the motion in part for all of the reasons I already expressed due to workload concerns. There's nothing in this motion that suggests what would come off the list in order to accommodate this additional action. And I think that's critically important, because if we're going to take something propose to take something off the list, I think it's incumbent on the council and the executive committee, in this case, to weigh the pros and cons of the prioritization that we're making. If we're, without knowing what would come off the list and whether we feel that should be a higher priority than bullet and frigate mackerel, or is in fact can be a lower priority than bullet and frigate mackerel, it's impossible to know whether this is a wise choice for 2022. So I oppose the motion.
All right. I appreciate that, Mike. Chris, let me ask you. So you mentioned that if this motion were to pass, that between now and December, that you and staff and possibly Garfo and you guys would have discussions. And do you think it would be possible to bring forth some items that could be considered to be removed after having those discussions for the full council to decide which one's more important?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, short answer is yes, we could do that.
Okay. So that would be the process then. If the executive committee supports this, Chris would work with staff and Garfo to come up with some suggestions for the council so that the council can fully understand what would need to come off the list. And that would be that opportunity to prioritize which is more important in the council's mind, whether or not to do item 63, as an item to be completed next year, or to keep it under possible addition. So I assume that's clear for everybody right now. Does anyone else from the executive committee? I'll even take council members at this point that aren't on the executive committee. Does anyone have any comments? I heard from Mike Pentney. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none. Let's go out to the public. Pam, you've had your hand up for a little while. Pam Lyons-Groman, go ahead, and if you have a comment or a question, now's the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the council. This is Pam Lyons-Groman, the Executive Director of Wild Oceans, and I just want to speak in support of the motion. Just recounting the timeline to now, it goes back really to 2015. The Mid-Atlantic Council was the first to recognize, through research on the unmanaged forage omnibus, the importance of bullet and frigate in the offshore food web. And then in 2018, reached out to the South Atlantic Council for assistance, recognizing the very strong connection of bullet and frigate to Wahoo. And of course, the Dolphin Wahoo plan is very unique. It extends through the whole coast, and the committee includes liaisons from the New England Council and the Mid-Atlantic Council. And so the South Atlantic Council got to work and ensured their hard work to include bullet and frigate in the Dolphin Wahoo plan as ecosystem component species was completed in June, when the National Marine Fisheries Service issued the final rule, summarizing their importance not only to Wahoo, but to the offshore pelagic food web as a forage fish. And of course, that extends through the Mid-Atlantic region. So anyway, I believe we've been waiting patiently to kind of bring this to a close. It is important, and I certainly appreciate the out-of-the-box thinking and do recognize the tremendous workload of staff. The staff for the Mid-Atlantic Council is wonderful. Every time I have a question, they're so quick to respond. I know their plates are very full, but I appreciate this moving up, at least so it can be considered into the December meeting. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Pam. Appreciate your comment. Jeff Kalin?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hear what Mike's saying, what Mr. Pentney is saying, but that's up to the council to proceed or not. But isn't there already a possession limit within the forage amendments jurisdiction on bullet and frickin' mackerel of no more than 1,700 pounds of any of those forage species collectively? So why would the Mid-Atlantic Council need a new possession limit for these fish when there already is one? I don't understand that. The South Atlantic, I get it, because they don't have a forage plan, but can somebody help me answer that question? I've been cogitating on it for months, and I don't know why we need an action at the Mid-Atlantic Council to do this when there already is a possession limit. Thank you.
Can somebody help Jeff with that question? Somebody from staff, perhaps? Julia?
The short answer is that Garfo disapproved that part of the amendment. So they were on the list of species that the council put forward, and Garfo disapproved the inclusion of just those 2 species. So these are ongoing discussions about, so now what do we do about it?
Yeah, no, thank you, Julia. I totally forgot about that. We're neutral on that issue, frankly. We don't intend to do an EFP for either one of those species, by the way, in case anybody's wondering. But no, thanks for answering the question. I lost track of that detail over the years.
Yeah, you're not the only one, Jeff. I knew the answer. I thank goodness for Julia. Thank you, Julia, for clearing that up for us. I didn't want to say something wrong, but yeah, it's been going on. It's been going on for so long, we kind of forget things over time. But thank you. Anyone else from the public? Any comments regarding the motion? Okay, back to the council. I don't see any hands from members of the council. We did hear from Mike Pentney that he plans to vote against this motion. So with that, I'm not going to call for any consensus at this point. I'm going to read the motion into the record, and then members of the executive committee and the executive committee only will be voting on this motion. So the motion is move item number 63, bullet and frigate mackerel, to bluefish and include additional items discussed today under possible additions. All those members of the executive committee that support this motion, please raise your hand and leave your hand up. Okay, I count 7 in support. You can put your hands down, please. Okay, all those members that do not support the motion, please raise your hand. Okay, that's 7 against. You can put your hands down, please. Dewey and Joe, your hands are still up. Okay, thank you. Any abstentions? Okay, seeing no abstentions, motion fails by lack of majority, 7 to 0. Okay, so that concludes that item on for our business here today. Is there anything else that the executive committee would like to discuss? Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just so we have a complete understanding of what we need to move forward with, is it the executive committee's intent that bullet and frigate mackerel remain at the bottom of the list, or that we take it off the list entirely?
Well, I would say my interpretation would be that it stays under possible additions.
Okay.
And it is a little bit, I thought there seemed to be more support regarding the additional items discussed under possible additions. I know they were lumped together, and that could have created a problem between the two different items there. But I guess we can always take up another motion if somebody because I think bullet and frigate mackerel is what was drawing those votes. If somebody wanted to make a motion to include the additional items discussed today under possible additions, I'd certainly entertain that. And I think that under Robert's rules, we can do that since it has a different intent, not including bullet and frigate. Chris Bat-Savage?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have a question about the vote that we just took. I kind of saw the names flash up and quickly checked the executive committee roster on the website. I think there might have been a council member or two that voted when this is just for the executive committee, and I don't know if anyone else noticed that, because that would influence how the vote turned out.
Yeah, I wasn't. I was just counting hands, and that's probably my fault. I probably should have been doing a comparison on executive committee, but I appreciate you bringing that up. It's probably worth doing it again and I'll make sure this time I'll bring up on my iPad the executive committee list and just double check as we go. Chris, what do you think?
A good idea, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that again. And again, I apologize. That's my fault. I should have been paying a little closer attention to who was voting. So for now, Mary, I think you're running the board, right? Why don't we just move down? Let's keep the 7-7 up there. We'll just go down and we'll call for, do we have, under Robert's rules, do we need to do anything to revote? Is there a motion that needs to be done to do a revote? Or can we just say that there might have been a mistake and we just want to make sure we're clear?
I think, Mr. Chair, that'd be a question for John Almeida if he's on.
Is John here? Yeah, John.
Well, I think this is a unusual situation, but basically what we're saying is that we're concerned that the last vote might not have been valid.
Right.
So we're redoing it. And I think you might want to make note of that in the recording of this motion. Like, question has been raised as to whether, in counting the votes, were all voters executive committee members?
Okay.
And to remedy that, we're going to redo the vote.
Okay. So we'll make that comment there as part of the record. And then I'm going to read the names of the individuals who are on the executive committee. And those should be the only people voting regarding this motion at this time. Before I do that, let me go to Wes Townsend, who has his hand up. Go ahead, Wes.
Yeah, I think Skip voted. I think that was the extra person, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I did see Skip's name, and I just, yeah, that I was looking for hands, and all right, so I appreciate that. We are going to redo this. And so the executive committee, the only people who should be voting on this at this time are Mike Luisi, Wes Townsend, Chris Batsavage, Joe Semino, Maureen Davidson, Michelle Duvall, Sonny Gwynn, Dewey Himmelwright, Peter Hughes, Scott Lennox, Adam Nowalski, Kate Wilkie, Sarah Winslow, and Mike Pentney for Garfo. Those are the only individuals who should be voting at this time under executive committee. So again, I'll read the motion. Mary, if you can scroll down just one, so I can see the top of the motion. Or if you could scroll up, I was going to read the motion again. All right, we're going to do a revote. The motion is move item number 63, bullet and frigate mackerel, to Bluefish and include additional items discussed today under possible additions. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Okay, I have Batsavage, Winslow, Davidson, Duvall, Wilkie, and Lennox. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's 6 in support. You can take your hands down, please. Maureen, your hand's still up. Okay, thank you. Okay, all those members of the executive committee. Maureen, you want to put your hand down? There you go. Okay, Sonny. All right, all those opposed to the motion, please raise your hand. Okay, I have Semino, Towson, Pentney, Dewey, Peter Hughes, and Adam Nowalski, and Sonny Gwynn. That's 7 opposed. Okay, if you can put your hands down, please. Thank you. Any abstentions? Okay, seeing no abstentions, the motion fails for lack of majority, 6 to 7 to 0. Okay, Chris Batsavage, thanks for bringing that up, picking up on that. And we end up with the same result. So the motion fails for lack of majority. Is there anything else that the executive committee wants to bring before, bring up under this agenda item at this time? Chris Moore?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to go back to my earlier question and given the vote. Does bullet and frigate mackerel stay on the list as possible additions? And do all the other items that we talked about this morning stay on the list as possible additions?
Okay, I would say yes, but let me ask committee members what their thoughts are on that. Michelle Duvall?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. That was my assumption as well, is that, this motion was primarily focused on moving bullet and frigate sort of, above the line, so to speak, and that if this motion failed, that it still remained on the list of possible additions as item number 63. But I was operating under the assumption that because we had previously agreed by consensus, there's no objection from any other committee members with respect to the other added items, particularly the policy and process for review of unmanaged forage EFPs for new and emerging fisheries, that would stay as items to the possible list of additions. Thanks.
Yeah, that was how I was planning. That's how I interpreted it as well. Are you okay with that, Chris?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right. It's clear enough. Okay. So Chris, is there anything else we need to take up under executive committee right now?
I don't have anything else.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for your participation. That concludes our business here this morning. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting adjourned, and we will come back meeting as a full council. I just want to put it out there. There's been a change in the agenda for this afternoon. We're going to go ahead and flip-flop the chub mackerel specifications for the HMS diet study report. There were some timing differences. And so at 1 o'clock, we're going to come back and do chub mackerel specs. And then at 2 o'clock, we're going to do the HMS diet study report. So you guys are free until 1 o'clock, and we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock with the full council. Thanks everyone for your time this morning, and we'll talk in about an hour or so. Thanks.